Over the past 4 years of having this channel, I've encountered a ton of folks who are confused by the rights to adapting Tolkien's works. And honestly, it's totally understandable. They're a bit of a mess. So today I'm gonna break it all down for you, giving you a bit of the history, but primarily focusing on how the rights stand today. By the end, you should hopefully have an understanding of who can adapt what, and gaining an understanding for which projects are most likely to happen in the near future. A quick note, just to be clear, I'm not any kind of copyright lawyer and haven't seen any actual contracts or anything like that. There may be nuances or elements to the rights that aren't mentioned here, but this is a pretty thorough account of the things that are publicly known in the fandom. Obviously, the starting point for all rights relating to Tolkien's works would be with Tolkien himself. And indeed, this was the case after The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings were published. However, in 1969, Tolkien would sell the rights to his published Middle-earth books to American film studio United Artists. Tolkien was reportedly paid roughly $250,000 US for the rights, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million in today's dollars. It's also worth noting that Tolkien, and by extension his estate, would be owed a 7.5% royalty interest in any future adaptations of these works. These rights cover film, stage, gaming, and merchandise for both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. United Artists would ironically never produce a film based in Middle-earth, having abandoned the infamous Borman project from 1970. Instead, they would sell most of their rights to the Saul Zaentz Company in 1976. Saul Zaentz would then form Tolkien Enterprises, later renamed Middle-earth Enterprises, to manage their Middle-earth licenses. With these rights, we would end up with the 3 animated films: the Rankin-Bass Hobbit, Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings, and the Rankin-Bass Return of the King. These very film rights would also result in the Peter Jackson trilogies of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. However, there is one small quirk with the latter. Fans may recall that an additional studio was involved in The Hobbit, MGM. Remember when I said United Artists sold most of their rights to Saul Zaentz? Well, it turns out they held on to the distribution rights to The Hobbit, believing it to be the most likely to be adapted. Therefore, when it came time for New Line Cinema, under Warner Brothers, to embark on the Hobbit trilogy, they had the rights to produce the films, but not to distribute, aka release, said films. Therefore, MGM, who owned United Artists, had to be brought into the fray. Of course, films are just one form of adaptation that we've seen over the decades since Tolkien sold these rights. We've seen stage adaptations, video games, and merchandise, all of which has been licensed through Middle-earth Enterprises. In 2022, Middle-earth Enterprises was bought by the Embracer Group for $395 million, where it continues to operate as a division of the company. So in a nutshell, nearly every adaptation you've seen when it comes to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, including the latter's appendices, comes as a result of these rights originally sold by J.R.R. Tolkien himself in 1969. The Peter Jackson films, the animated films, Shadow of Mordor, War in the North, Return to Moria, the One Ring RPG, the Middle-earth strategy battle game, The Lord of the Rings Online, you name it, it almost certainly comes through these rights. And that's not even including other general merchandise, like the King's Wild card decks, drop keyboards, the Hobbiton movie set, Weta merch, all kinds of things. You can actually find a list of licensees on their website if you're curious. A huge key to these rights as Tolkien sold them is that they are in perpetuity, meaning these rights will never revert back to the Tolkien Estate. They will stay with Embracer/Middle-earth Enterprises unless the rights or the company itself is sold. Spider-Man fans will note this is quite different to the situation with Sony's rights, which dictate that Sony must churn out a Spider-Man related film at least once every 5 3/4 years. Otherwise, the rights revert back to Marvel, which is why the reboots for that franchise have come so frequently. They have to keep pumping out movies to maintain those rights. Thankfully, that is not the case when it comes to Middle-earth. Now, this pretty well covers one half of the pie that makes up Middle-earth rights as a whole. The other main player is, and has always been, the Tolkien Estate. For those unfamiliar, this is the legal body made of Tolkien's descendants and family who manage all copyrights over his literary works. So what does the Tolkien Estate own? First, the easy part. When it comes to Middle-earth, this includes all of the books Christopher Tolkien edited and published. The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, the entire 12-volume History of Middle-earth series, Beren and Luthien, The Children of Húrin, and The Fall of Gondolin. It also includes The Nature of Middle-earth, edited by Carl Hostetter, and The Fall of Númenor, edited by Brian Sibley. And while we covered extensively all the rights Embracer now owns for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, there is one key item that they do not: TV rights. TV rights were not part of those original rights sold by J.R.R. Tolkien. So the estate held these until 2017, when Amazon secured the rights to develop a reported 5-season TV series with potential for spin-offs. This, of course, would become the Rings of Power series. These rights would reportedly cost Amazon close to $250 million, giving Amazon access to The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and its appendices. Obviously, more recent transactions make the original price of $2 million for film, stage, gaming, and merchandise rights look like quite the bargain. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Over the past couple years, I've seen a number of people convey their surprise that we've seen no merchandise when it comes to the Rings of Power. Personally, I would love a replica Two Trees dagger. However, and again, I'm no lawyer and don't personally know the intricacies of these contracts, it would appear that Amazon cannot sell merchandise for their own show without partnering with Middle-earth Enterprises. Because, as we stated earlier, they own merchandise rights to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Now, when it comes to the Rings of Power, there's another disclaimer needed. It's also been reported from the showrunners and studio that they're able to request permission to use things beyond The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings on a case-by-case basis. Case in point, deep-diving fans noticed that the maps released for the show included things like the star-shaped Númenor and specific location names that only appear in the pages of Unfinished Tales. Over the months and years, I've seen all kinds of comments about adapting stories from the Silmarillion. Indeed, as recently as my interview with Philippa Boyens, I was getting comments from folks thinking we were alluding to a potential Children of Húrin adaptation when mentioning there were other types of dragons. As much as I would love to see a Children of Húrin adaptation, that's not in the cards with the rights that are currently on the table. The adaptation rights to this book, like the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, History of Middle-earth, etc., lie firmly with the Tolkien Estate, and will not be adapted until such a time as the estate chooses to license them. Personally, I really hope that day does come. Seeing these stories brought to life and adapted well, of course, would be an absolute dream come true. And while I understand fan fears of these tales being adapted poorly, I've always been of the mindset that you can't get great adaptations if you don't have any adaptations being made. In the meantime, we'll see future projects coming from both sides of this diagram. Future episodes of The Rings of Power on one side, and future films like The War of the Rohirrim, and the 3 other films being planned at Warner Brothers. This has been a pretty broad overview of the rights situation when it comes to Middle-earth, and it's worth noting that it's far from comprehensive in terms of all the rights. For example, while Middle-earth Enterprises owns the film rights, Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema own the rights to their adaptations themselves. Want to make a board game featuring Ian McKellen's version of Gandalf? You'll need Warner Brothers for that. This means there's a lot of connections within the wide web of rights. For instance, Games Workshop, makers of the Middle-earth strategy battle game, have both a license through Warner Brothers, allowing them to adapt things as featured in the films, but also a license through Middle-earth Enterprises, meaning they can adapt from the text. This yields some pretty cool results, like seeing Smaug or Elrond as they appear in the films, but rounding out the world by also featuring Elrond's sons Elladan and Elrohir, who are only found in the books. Another recent example is the fact that New Line Cinema is listed in the credits for The Rings of Power. While we may not know the full extent of this, the smart money here is on design elements in the TV series matching the designs in Peter Jackson's films owned by New Line. Things like the Balrog, Gil-galad's spear Aiglos, and Elendil's future sword Narsil range from very similar to nearly identical to their film counterparts. While this can seem like a huge complicated web of rights for the various stories, books, and types of adaptations, Hopefully this guide gives some clarity for those confused. At the very least, I think this should give you an idea for who would need to be involved for any given project to come to fruition. But now I'll turn it over to you. Let me know in the comments what Middle-earth adaptation you'd most like to see. Film, TV, game, whatever. And for an extra credit point, note which right holders would have to be involved to make it happen. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.